The screams echo through the forest. Rain pours down like blood on bronze. The air is thick with smoke and fear. Shields crash, orders are lost in the storm, and men vanish into the mud without a trace. The proud eagles of Rome, symbols of power that once terrified nations, lie broken beneath the trees. Legion after legion collapses, swallowed by the wild heart of Germania. No one knows who is attacking them. The enemy is invisible, striking from the shadows, disappearing between the trees like ghosts. The road ahead has vanished, the path home is gone, and the mighty Roman formation has turned into a panicked swarm. Every sound, every snap of a branch could be death. By the third day, the forest has fallen silent again. No trumpet sounds, no messenger escapes. 20,000 Roman soldiers have vanished as if the earth itself has devoured them. And yet this was not a random slaughter. It was planned, a perfect trap, set by someone Rome thought it could trust. A man who knew exactly how Romans fought, and how to destroy them. But how did the world's greatest army walk straight into the jaws of death? The answer begins long before the first spear was thrown, before the screams, before the rain. It begins in the quiet days of peace, when Rome thought it had nothing to fear, and when its deadliest enemy still called it friend. The story begins months before the forest turned red. Publius Quinctilius Varus, governor of the new Roman province in Germania, rode at the head of his legions with calm confidence. He had ruled Syria, dealt with kings, and believed he understood men. To him, Germania was just another province waiting to be civilized, a wild frontier soon to be tamed by Roman law, Roman order, and Roman pride. At his side rode a man he trusted more than most Romans did, Arminius. Born a German, raised in Rome, trained as a Roman officer, Arminius spoke Latin better than many senators. He had fought for Rome, eaten with Roman generals, and earned his citizenship through loyalty. Varus called him friend. The legions respected him. And yet, behind his calm eyes burned a quiet hatred, the kind that waits, watches, and never forgets. To Rome, Arminius was proof that the barbarians could be civilized. But to his own people he was the hidden blade, a hero in disguise. As Varus planned to bring peace, Arminius planned something far greater. He would lead the legions into the forest, smiling all the while. And once they entered his land, his trap would close. He would lead them in, and never bring them out. The plan was already in motion. Every path chosen, every messenger delayed, every word of comfort carefully spoken. Arminius had built his trap not with walls or chains, but with trust. And soon, that trust would lead 20,000 men into the mouth of the forest, and into history's silence. The morning they entered the forest, the sky was already dark. Heavy clouds rolled over the hills, and a sharp wind carried the smell of rain. Varus rode near the front, calm as ever. He believed the tribes had risen in small rebellion. Nothing his disciplined legions couldn't crush. And so, with over 20,000 men, he marched straight into the Teutoburg Forest. At first, the path was wide enough for wagons and cavalry. But soon the trees grew closer, the air thicker. The road narrowed until the long Roman column stretched for miles. Soldiers, horses, carts, and families of camp followers winding endlessly through the shadows. The armor that once shone like gold was now caked in mud. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavy. The forest swallowed sound. Orders echoed and vanished. The men could barely see a few steps ahead. Branches snapped underfoot, wheels stuck deep in the dirt, and every movement felt slower. Still the Romans marched, blind, disciplined, doomed. The storm broke suddenly, thunder shaking the ground. The line fell apart as men tried to pull the wagons free. Shields slipped from soaked hands, arrows of lightning flashed through the fog, and the rain turned the path into a swamp. And then, somewhere deep within that endless forest, Arminius vanished. He had ridden ahead, claiming to gather support from friendly tribes. Varus trusted him. He always had. But hours passed, and Arminius never returned. Still, the legions pressed forward, unaware that every mile brought them closer to death. Hidden among the trees, thousands of German warriors crouched in silence, waiting for the signal, every drop of rain, every gust of wind, every sound of cracking wood. It was all part of the storm Arminius had promised. And soon it would break upon Rome. The forest grew still. Even the rain seemed to hold its breath. Every man felt it. The weight of something coming, something unseen. And then, from somewhere beyond the mist, the storm finally broke. The first attack came with no warning. One moment there was only the steady sound of rain and creaking wagons. The next, a deafening horn tore through the forest. Then another. The echoes came from every direction. Birds burst from the trees. Horses reared and screamed. And before anyone could understand what was happening, the first wave of spears struck. They came out of nowhere, from the trees, from the mist, from the ground itself. Dark shapes with painted faces, yelling in a language that sounded like thunder. The front of the Roman line collapsed instantly. Soldiers fell, impaled before they could even raise their shields. Arrows hissed through the air. Officers shouted orders, but their voices vanished in the storm. Varus tried to rally his men. "Form up! Form ranks!" he shouted, his voice breaking through the chaos. But the terrain betrayed them. The path was too narrow, the mud too deep. The formations that had crushed empires could not even hold their shape here. Shields slipped, swords tangled, and men stumbled over the fallen. The Germans struck hard, then vanished again into the forest. Every tree became an enemy. Every sound was a threat. Panic spread like fire. The legions tried to push forward, but the path was blocked by broken carts and dying men. Behind them the wagons burned. The sky turned red with firelight and storm clouds, and somewhere, far ahead, Varus called for his German scouts, the men who knew the land, the men led by Arminius. But none returned, not one, because they were already waiting, in the trees. Then came another horn, lower, longer, a signal that unleashed hell itself. The entire forest came alive. Thousands of warriors poured from the shadows, roaring as they crashed into the Roman line. The thunder of their charge drowned out the rain. Legion standards fell. Centurions disappeared beneath waves of screaming men. Swords clashed in the dark, the sound of metal against bone echoing through the storm. Some Romans tried to flee, only to find the forest closing in from every side. By nightfall, the ground was slick with blood. The rain washed it into the mud until everything was red, the soil, the armor, the rivers that ran between the trees. The cries of the wounded filled the air, rising and falling with the wind, and as the light faded, the forest swallowed them whole. By nightfall, the forest was alive with Roman screams. The battle did not end, it only slowed. Hour by hour the cries grew weaker, until even the wounded had no voice left to give. The forest swallowed them all, and when the rain finally began to ease, there was nothing left but ghosts. By the third day, the rain had stopped, but the forest still wept. Smoke rose between the trees, and the once proud eagles of Rome lay face down in the mud. The great legions that had conquered kingdoms and crushed rebellions were gone. Swallowed by the woods they had thought harmless. The moans of the wounded mixed with the cawing of crows. No one was giving orders anymore. No drums, no horns. Only the slow fading breath of a dying army. Varus sat among the ruins of his command. His armor was broken, his men scattered, his dream of peace shattered. Around him, the forest was alive with the sound of victory. But it was not Roman. His soldiers had fought bravely, but discipline meant nothing in that place. The enemy was everywhere and nowhere. And as the last of his officers fell, Varus knew what awaited him if captured: humiliation, torture, and the end of all dignity. So he made his final choice. Kneeling in the mud, he drew his sword and whispered a last prayer to Rome before falling upon the blade. A commander's death, but one that brought no honor, only silence. Those who survived the ambush wished they hadn't. Some were hunted down and killed. Others were dragged away in chains, offered as sacrifices to the German gods. The victors hung Roman heads and standards from the trees, trophies swaying in the cold wind. The Teutoburg Forest became a vast graveyard, armor rusting, bodies unburied, and the smell of death carried for miles. For 3 days, the empire's pride drowned in the mud. When the news reached Rome, Emperor Augustus tore his robes in despair. He struck his head against the wall and cried out, his voice echoing through the halls of marble, "Varus, give me back my legions!" But no answer came. Germania kept its silence, and Rome, for the first time in centuries, felt fear. For a long time, no one spoke of it. The names of the fallen were whispered only in grief, the memory buried beneath shame. Yet the shadow of that forest would stretch far beyond its trees, a wound carved deep into the heart of the empire. The Teutoburg Forest did not just swallow men, it swallowed Rome's ambition. In a single blow, 3 full legions vanished. The 17th, the 18th, and the 19th. Their eagle standards, symbols of Roman pride, were lost among the trees. And after that day, those numbers were never used again. The legions themselves were erased from the army's rolls, as if Rome could not bear to remember them. For years, the empire trembled at the thought of the forest. Germania, once seen as a frontier ready for conquest, was now a wound that refused to heal. The Rhine River became Rome's new border, not by choice but by fear. Every emperor after Augustus would look toward those dark woods and remember what had happened there. No general dared to cross deep into that land again without thinking of Varus and his doomed legions. Yet out of defeat came vengeance. Years later, a new commander, Germanicus, the nephew of Augustus, would lead a massive army back into the same wilderness. He came not to conquer but to avenge. What he found among the trees would haunt him forever. Skulls nailed to trunks, rusted weapons buried in mud, and the bones of thousands still lying where they fell. The Battle of Teutoburg Forest changed everything. Rome would go on to conquer lands from Britain to Egypt, but its dream of ruling all of Germania died there. The empire that once believed itself unstoppable had finally learned fear. Rome would rise again, and its banners would once more fill the horizon, but never beyond that forest. Because even the greatest empire the world had ever seen learned that some lands cannot be conquered. But one Roman general would return to avenge them, and his campaign would bring the forest back to life in blood once more. Years later, the sound of Roman drums would echo through those woods again. Germanicus would march to reclaim the honor his people lost, and though victory came at a terrible cost, the forest never truly yielded. Time passed. The empire rose and fell, but the forest remained. The story of Teutoburg is not just about war. It's about trust, betrayal, and the moment when history itself took a different path. Because after this, Rome never looked the same again. But what do you think? Was it destiny that Rome fell into that forest, or the arrogance of an empire that believed it could never be beaten? Every voice in history has a lesson to tell, and sometimes the loudest ones are whispered from the shadows of defeat. If you enjoy uncovering the hidden moments that shaped the ancient world, the victories, the betrayals, and the ghosts that still linger in Rome's past, then stay with us. Subscribe, and keep the echoes of history alive, because the empire may have fallen, but its stories still stand.